So, welcome back to the Canuckonomicon. I am your host, Benjamin Wandio. I am here with my producer and the man who raised me and christened me with my name, Mr. Todd Dirty Clyde Wandio.
I've also wiped your backside.
Yeah, you definitely did that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you remember that movie Day After Tomorrow?
Yes.
I am 100% certain, after the weather we've been having this past week, that Roland Emmerich, the director, has never been to Canada. I don't think he's ever been anywhere north of, like, California.
You're probably right. Yeah.
Like, I know he's German, so technically he's been north of California, but Germany is not that north.
No.
Because he's, like, showing the cold, like, this stalking monster that can be stopped by just lighting some books on fire.
Yeah. he hasn't felt the way that your skin just hardens. Just
That's a man who's never had to untangle a... That's a man who's never had to untangle a block heater cord.
A frozen
to try
block
and
heater
get that
cord.
stiff... like, I'm always worried I'm going to snap mine in half.
Right? Yeah. Where I'm recording from, it's minus 36.
Oh my gosh.
And then if you add the wind chill, which people anywhere but here wouldn't understand, wind chill actually lowers the temperature. So it's more like minus 42 or something.
Yeah. Well, the other day, even in the city with the wind chill, it was minus 45. Mm-hmm. To put that in perspective for our Fahrenheit listeners, that's minus 40, but 5 lower than that.
Yes. Well, minus 40 is minus 40 in
both.
In both. Yeah. That's just...
So if you go 5 lower than minus 40...
yeah, that's just damn
That's
cold.
what our weather's been.
You get to a point it's just damn cold.
Anything after minus 30 is pretty much meaninglessly cold.
Yeah, well, and machinery stops working.
Yep.
Electronics will not work in this cold. Like, if it's been sitting outside, the
I play Pokemon Go when I walk my dog. And one day, the battery got so cold that even though once I brought my phone inside and warmed it up, I had 10% battery left.
Yep.
Outside, my phone was actually just dead.
Yeah.
The whatever reaction that makes the battery work had just stopped. It was like, no, it's too cold.
Yeah, it is. It is a special kind of thing we have here.
Yeah, it's pointlessly cold. I don't know why human beings ever got this far north in the winter and went, I want to live here. Like, year-round.
You worked outdoors for a truss company in a winter that was something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, only it was like this for months, not weeks.
Yeah.
It was like months.
Yeah.
It was so cold that there were days where they're like, just come inside. Because I was stacking the trusses out in the yard.
Yeah.
And they're like, if there's nothing going out, just come inside and wait.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's when you're putting layers on your layers. And then that was when I stopped caring what I looked like in the winter.
Yes.
Because, like, when you're a teenager, you know, you go outside and, like, it could be minus 40 out and you don't want to put, like, your gloves and your toque and your scarf on because you're too embarrassed to, like, actually look like that. And so you always get frostbite when you're a teenager. But that was when I stopped caring. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a scarf on. I'm going to put my dumb toque on. I'm going to put my big fat mitts on because it's so cold out that it is physically painful to just be outside. The wind hurts your face.
Yeah. It makes it so you can't breathe, actually.
Yeah, it's like getting punched in the chest.
Yeah, try whistling when it's this cold and there's a wind in your face. It
That's
doesn't.
how you get hoarfrost on your
No,
lips.
it doesn't work. You try, you whistle, and all of a sudden you're.
All right.
All right.
Anyway, so that was our weather report for the day.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm still trying to keep it relatively lighthearted. It's not as goofy as a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but this one is a little bit more of an uplifting story. And before we begin, I just want to give a huge shout out to Brenna J. Thompson. That's Brenna with one N, J. Thompson, whose book, Finding Fortune, Documenting and Imagining the Life of Rose Fortune, made up a huge part of my research, because this seems to be one of the only biographies of Rose Fortune that's longer than like 2 paragraphs and has more research than just, this is what people around Annapolis Royals say.
Uh,
So I'm really glad that thanks to Thompson's research, I'm able to spread this story a little further, because it's a really, really cool story. And so with that, I'm going to begin. There's this kind of myth that a lot of Canadians believe that Canada never had slavery. There's this kind of like, you know what I'm talking about?
yeah.
Like there's this kind of idea that slavery was an American problem, never a Canadian problem.
Yeah, well, it would have been a British-Canadian problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Pre-Confederation Canada, but still what we would consider Canada for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But even more than that, there's also this kind of belief that black people living in Canada came here later on in our history. So namely after the American Civil War, or in some cases even more recently through more recent immigration.
Right.
But the truth is that at the same time as the southern colonies, the southern British colonies, were using slaves to farm sugar and cotton, we were using them to clean houses and farm taters up here in the northern colonies.
Yes, on the East Coast.
Yeah, over on the East Coast in upper and lower Canada. And the truth is that Canada had slaves. We didn't actually abolish slavery in Canada until the 1st of August, 1834, 1 year after Britain.
Yeah. We kept them for a whole year. But
Yeah, it was the colonies were given kind of a slower phase out program where, like, even after purchasing of new slaves was abolished, you could keep any people who were born into slavery unless they were born after the abolishing of slavery.
Yeah,
So if they were already slaves, they had to stay slaves.
it was grandfathered in.
It was genuinely grandfathered
Isn't
in.
that crazy?
So
Absolutely insane.
it was a way to kind of keep colonial landowners from rebelling, which obviously worked really well for America.
Well, here's the thing, that the colonies only existed for one purpose, and that was to provide
Making
resources to the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So they
So
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, they could have cared less about what was happening with the people or how they got the resources
Absolutely.
until public outcry in England became so strong that they finally had to abolish slavery.
Yeah. Yeah, so the truth is that black people have been living in Canada pretty much as long as rich white people have. Sure, we didn't end slavery thanks to a civil war. It was nothing so grandiose as that. But that's because in Canada, and in what we now call Canada, it was never as big of an economic driver most of Canada's economic drive was in things like trade and fur trading. We weren't a big, like, our main resource was furs,
Yeah.
which you couldn't really use slaves to go get.
Yes.
So most slavery up here was indentured servitude. So people who had been, say, sold to the Northwest Fur Trading Company in order to pay off debt, or it was domestic. It was people keeping slaves in their house as servants over in the more eastern colonies where we had things like governors living.
Right.
But still, black people played an important role in Canada and its history, and today we're actually going to talk about one person in particular. But to start out her story, we're going to have to go south of the border all the way to the city of brotherly love.
Philadelphia.
That's right. So sometime around 1774...
I just want to pause here. Just want to, before you get right into the topic, I want our American listeners to be astounded at the alacrity with which I throw out facts about the United States or the names of places, because I would guess that it is not as common in the States for someone to be aware of anything that happens or has happened in or exists in Canada.
I would say that's probably true of most places outside of Canada.
Which is kind of interesting. Canadians are well-educated people about the world we live in.
Yeah.
It could be because we are a country of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
We have had to be more open to learning about the places where our population came from.
That's part of it. I also think part of it is Canada is so small, and so much of what goes on here is dependent on other countries.
Population.
Especially America.
Population-wise, you mean?
Yeah. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Population-wise,
Yeah.
not size. Size-wise, we're almost as big as Russia.
Yes. Anyway, that was my little boost for Canadian intellect. Continue, my friend, with your important topic.
Of course, I had to come in and Canadian this up by just like immediately like backtracking and apologizing and like hemming and hawing about it, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
So, sometime around 1774, in Philadelphia, a pair of slaves who had fled from Virginia, named Fortune and Aminta, had a child. We don't know what conditions they were living in. What we do know is that Philadelphia at the time was a largely Quaker-controlled city. So if you're not aware of who the Quakers are, or the Society of Friends, as they were also known, they were a liberal Christian-based movement known for being extremely politically active, particularly with regards to abolition and equal rights. It wasn't just abolition, it was abolition and what we would call feminism now. It was this belief, the reason why Philadelphia became called the city of brotherly love is because the Quaker movement was so powerful there. And Quakers were known to often free their slaves voluntarily if they owned any to begin with. We do know also that the name of their child was Rose. In 1774, the abolition movement was only just starting to gain steam, thanks largely in part to the work of the Quakers. And we don't know what conditions or what things brought Fortune and Aminta to Philadelphia in particular. We do know that they fled Virginia because we had a runaway slave flyer that was published in the newspaper. Rumors suggest in Nova Scotia that they had escaped from a so-called Devon family. Although according to Thompson's research, no slave-owning family with that or a similar name ever existed anywhere in Philadelphia. However, there was a township near Philadelphia called Devon. Mm-hmm. And so it's likely that they lived in the Devon Township, and just over time, through the retelling of their story, this turned into the Devon family.
Right.
We do know that there are no clear records of where they were in Philadelphia. And the only record we have that they were ever in Virginia is this runaway slave flyer, which gives their names and descriptions and matches pretty closely to the timeline that we have in terms of Rose Fortune's story over time. We may never know for sure where or when Rose was born, but we do know that in 1783, when she was around 9 or 10 years old, they landed in Annapolis Royal. Annapolis Royal is a port town on the kind of southeast side of the Bay of Fundy, almost directly across from St. John's.
It's in Nova Scotia.
Yes, that's right. In Nova Scotia. At the time was still also Nova Scotia. We'll talk a bit about that a bit later, but we can assume this as that it was 1783 because the only written evidence of where Fortune, Rose's father, appears is in the muster roll of arriving loyalists, where he's listed as Fortune, a free Negro, with a wife and a child under 10 years old.
Okay.
So he was coming up here with the Loyalists. So it's 1783. This is only a handful of years after the Revolutionary War, which was 1776, right?
So he came over as a loyalist. So he was supporting the British side in the War of Independence and the unrest. Yeah.
Or at the very least, he came over with the Loyalists, because at this time there were a lot of Loyalists migrating to Canada.
Right.
In particular, they were migrating to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So at the time, both what we called Nova Scotia and New Brunswick were actually one colony at the time.
Yes.
Particularly, what happened was there were so many migrants coming in that we're talking like around 40,000 people migrated to Nova Scotia, which actually tripled the population of the region.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the burden, the kind of what do you call that? Like paperwork burden.
Oh,
I can't
the
remember
bureaucracy. I mean, bureaucratic.
Yeah, the bureaucratic burden was becoming so much they had to split the colony into two.
Yeah.
And that's how New Brunswick actually got founded. It was originally part of Nova Scotia, but so many people moved there all at once, they had to basically split it so that they could handle all the paperwork and all the movement of the people coming in.
Right. Now these are British loyalists, not necessarily black loyalists.
That's correct.
Right. But it would have
only
included...
about 3,500.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think my internet might have just cut out. Just give me a second. So only about 3,500 of these loyalists were so-called black loyalists, which actually included freemen as well as slaves and indentured servants who were traveling with their owners. So slavery was still legal in Canada at this time. Thompson notes in her book that it can actually be difficult to tell just by looking at the roll who was free and who was currently a slave. Though one of the ways to do so was by whether or not a person had a surname. Enslaved people like Rose's father often didn't have surnames, but freed slaves often took one, hence the relatively common surname Freeman. When Rose arrived at around 10 years old in the year of 1783, we don't know precisely what her life was like growing up in Nova Scotia. We can try to understand a bit by looking at what life was like for black loyalists in general. And as I'm sure you can imagine, life was not good.
No, it would have been probably just a little bit better, maybe in some cases a little worse than or harder than those if they had been slaves.
Yeah. So the British had made lofty promises to all the loyalists of free land who served in the army. A family was supposed to receive 1 acre for each family head, so father,
Hmm.
with 50 acres for each person in the household other than the husband or father. So that was wives, children, well, wife, children, and slaves. Another 50 acres for each slave you owned.
Hmm.
Military officers were supposed to receive 1,000 acres, and privates were to receive 100. But out of the 649 black men who served in the Black Pioneer Militia, only 187 ever received any land at all. Those who served received almost no land other than one colonel who should have received 1,000, right? Because he's an officer,
Yeah,
who received 200 acres. And even then, he ended up waiting 4 years before receiving it.
and that's 200 acres of unbroken land.
Not just unbroken, those who were receiving land among the black loyalists found out that they were basically being given rocks. The land they
Hmm.
were given was completely unsuitable for growing crops. And so there were a few all black communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick at the time, such as Birchtown, but these areas were rugged, rocky, with very acidic soil that was pretty much no good for growing anything.
Hmm.
All the better land, such as the land around Annapolis Royal, had been given to whites to farm. Those black loyalists who had skilled trades, such as seamstresses and cooks, or farriers, or any of those kind of working trades, found themselves in a slightly better position than their farmer peers, but not by much. Black workers were always paid less than their white counterparts, which actually led to Canada's first race riot 1 year after Rose arrived in 1784, when a group of white loyalists destroyed houses belonging to freed blacks, blaming the blacks for taking their jobs due to their lower wages. Sound
Oh,
familiar?
it, yes. The wheel just keeps on turning, doesn't it?
Yeah. Poverty, sickness, harsh weather, all of these took a toll on Canada's black colonists in those days. And this was the environment that Rose grew up in. Based on what little we can find and on what family legend there is, Fortune, Rose's father, died shortly after arriving in Annapolis Royal. This is not only backed up by the legend, but the fact that Fortune, after arriving in port, never shows up in any records afterwards.
Okay.
This would have been totally devastating for Rose and Aminta, her mother. Life was hard enough for black men in Nova Scotia. It was only harder for black women with no one to support them. Just consider what that muster roll said when they arrived. It was Fortune, wife, unnamed, and daughter under 10.
Hmm.
Black women were basically invisible in Nova Scotian society at the time.
Women in general were undervalued,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
and so if you were a woman of color, that was even, I mean, considering that the men didn't even have last names in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
uh, it's just criminal thinking about what that life must have been like.
Yeah, it was not great. And the only reason we even have any idea what Rosa's mother name was is because of that runaway slave ad where
Right.
she is specifically named. Otherwise, she's simply Fortune's wife or Rose's mother in pretty much every other record that we have.
So they never name her.
No, not in any records in Nova Scotia. That's totally wild, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah. So, Rose's life between 1775 and 1828 is largely a mystery. As Thompson points out in her book, Thompson believes that Rose and Aminta moved to Brindleytown for a while, and some records back this up. And she also believes that while there, Aminta would have been trying to find a partner. Re-enslavement in Nova Scotia was still a risk. And there also existed at the time a very significant gender division of labor, particularly in the black community.
Okay.
Even if she did find a partner, we don't know what his name was or who he was or what he did. We also know that from 1787 to 1789, Nova Scotia was hit with a famine, and so Rose would have grown up during that time. This famine was so bad that people were selling clothing, furniture, and in some cases would even sell themselves into indentured servitude in order to just get enough money to purchase food. And
Wow.
still, Aminta and Rose persisted. Yeah, it was a rough time in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
But
It is a rocky place.
yeah, this is not a lush, vibrant land of plenty, but for a lot of people, I think it was considered kind of like the lesser of two evils. And for
Right.
another group of people, I imagine it was just a matter of I got nowhere else to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the 1790s, though, there arose a big opportunity for the black community in Nova Scotia. Namely, the opportunity to leave and go to their own colony in Africa.
No. Liberia.
Sierra Leone.
Right.
So, the Sierra Leone Company was founded by a group of black loyalists who were growing frustrated with their with the unfulfilled promises of the colonial Canadian government to give them land. They went over to England to try and argue their case directly in front of Parliament. Instead, they ended up meeting with a group of businessmen who wanted to get some workers over to their own colony in Africa, and they founded what became called the Sierra Leone Company. So they were offered the opportunity to go to Africa and found a new colony. To do so, you had to be free. You couldn't be owned. You couldn't be a slave at the time. You had to have no debt, so you couldn't be somebody who was just using this as an excuse to not pay someone back.
Right.
And you had to be willing to take the months-long boat trip to Africa. Africa
Yes.
is not close to North America.
No, well, the trip over killed more of the slaves than slavery did. Mm-hmm. When they were coming over, they were stacked one on top of the other, and the seas were rough. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, in this case, they'd be staying in marginally better conditions, but risk of disease, scurvy, falling overboard, getting caught in a hurricane were still there. And also, it's a long, long trip. So it's going to be pretty dull. But a lot of people took this up. And most of the history of the black colonists in Nova Scotia kind of will follow the people who went to Sierra Leone, and actually very little is written about the people who chose to stay behind. Rose is one of the people who chose to stay behind. We don't know why Rose didn't leave. She would have been around 18 at the time, and her mother would have been in her 50s. It's possible that at this time Rose already had debts.
Yeah.
Or it's also possible that she may have just been unwilling to leave her mother, who may have had some or may have been ill. We also... She may have also just liked Nova Scotia. We don't actually know. There's no record of why she chose to stay behind. We just know that she did.
I think it's, no matter how hard your life is, where you're living is home. And to, to take on an adventure like that takes a certain kind of spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a huge amount of desperation, as many
Right.
Canadian
And
colonists
so,
were.
so if you've got nothing to lose, you go for a venture like that. But, if you
Yeah.
already have set up a life where you're at, no matter how miserable conditions seem to be, you've fought through things. And so stuff around you take a lot more importance. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rose did go on her own little mini adventure at this time. She visited Long Island for a few years. We don't know for certain why she was there, but we do know that while she was there, she had her child, Jane Fortune. Or rather, just Jane. She didn't have a surname yet. Rose still had not taken a surname. We don't know what Jane's fate was for certain. There's a chance that Jane died and Rose had a second child, and it was kind of traditional that if you had a child die young, that if you had another child afterwards, you would give them the same name. And the only reason we don't know is because we have one record of when Rose is giving birth to a child named Jane, and we have another record of this child getting married where the birth date is listed quite a bit later.
So that sounds suspicious.
Well, and the thing is that if we go by the birth date on the marriage certificate, her child would have been 15 and getting married to a considerably older gentleman. Or if we go by the original birth certificate or a record of birth, there was no birth certificate that we could find, but a record of birth. The child would have been 35 at the time she married.
That's pretty unusual.
Well, both are pretty unusual.
It wasn't unusual for someone who was 15 to be married to someone considerably older. That would
yeah, that's true. It wasn't out of the question, but it was not. It was not that common. It was not unheard of, though. You're correct.
Pause for a sec. I'm running upstairs to fill my coffee cup.
Okay. All right. So, in 1800, Rose returns to Annapolis Royal after an eventful few decades outside the city. So, living in Brindley, traveling to Rhode Island, or Long Island. And in 1800, at the ripe young age of her 50s, Rose began to make a name for herself. She started a small business as a baggage handler, or as most people in town called her, a baggage crusher. Initially, she didn't have a wheelbarrow. Eventually, she saved up enough money to get a wheelbarrow, and she was known for stacking that wheelbarrow so full of luggage that the luggage on the bottom would get crushed.
Yeah.
She also was quite entrepreneurial, and aside from hauling loads up from the ports to the homes and inns of her customers, she also, in her spare time, worked as a boot polisher and ran a wake-up service for travelers. So if you needed to be woken up at a certain time, you just let Rose know, and she'd go and hammer on the door and wake you up. So she was probably around 51, and she was something of a stern presence. If people didn't get out of her way quickly enough when moving baggage, she would give them a warning shout and then hit them with her walking stick if they still didn't move.
I love it.
She also apparently broke a broom at a local church. Details are thin on why or how, but break a broom she certainly did. Also around this time, she started going by Rose Fortune. So she took her father's given name as her surname.
Okay.
Rose was also known for going about her work while smoking a pipe, wearing a, quote, men's jacket, a men's hat, and a short skirt and legged boots, which gave her quite a distinctive look that made her easy to spot when going about her business. Black women in Nova Scotia were often considered to be unladylike or manly. If a woman of color dressed up for a special event in the same way that a white woman did, she would often be roundly mocked for this so-called faux pas. The constant noting by historians of Rose's attire could be passed as part of this, though, as Thompson points out, an easier explanation exists. They didn't really make laborers' clothing for women at the time, and Rose was a laborer. She was
Yeah.
hauling boxes and luggage and, doing hard physical work.
Well, she was an entrepreneur as
Yeah.
well.
And when you're living in a Nova Scotian city hauling boxes up from the port, a women's jacket just isn't going to cut it. It's just not rugged enough to put up with the rain and snow and sleet and the constant wear from like moving stuff. And it's also possible that she was actually wearing hand-me-downs from her parents, namely her father's hat and coat and her mother's petticoat and skirts. The painting of Rose that exists shows her wearing similar clothing to that as was described being owned by her parents in the runaway slave ad from the Virginia Gazette. Yeah. So
What a neat
yeah,
lady.
so clothing was expensive, and so if her parents' clothing could
Yeah.
still serve, there would have been little reason to do away with it.
Well, and she doesn't seem the kind of person that would would do away with something just because it seemed to be, oh, this is a man's coat or these are man's breeches. I'm sure she was just like a very practical person.
She definitely comes off that way.
Yeah.
And Rose, on a kind of unofficial level, took on kind of a oh, sorry, everything just kind of moved here. Oh, here we are.
Maybe you had a stroke.
Yeah, no, I bumped something with my computer and it made my notes go wickety whack. Okay, here we are. I found my spot. Rose also became, unofficially, Canada's first black police officer.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So, she was a big, strong woman who was unafraid of using her walking stick as a cudgel. And so she earned a reputation around Annapolis Royal for keeping the peace at night, usually chasing kids back to their homes and warning them to stay out of trouble by tapping her walking stick as she went on her patrols. As far as I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure there was no formal police force in Nova Scotia at this time.
No, I would think
Because
not.
I know the Mounties were founded basically almost exclusively because of rum running from America, and they were Canada's first police force.
Yes, and they were really an army
Yeah,
without being called an
they
army.
were
Yeah, we've
mounted.
mentioned
They were
that
dragoons.
before.
They were mounted pistols, basically.
Yeah.
So she kind of became the local cop. She was also working for a lawyer at that time as a porter, hauling stuff for him, delivering notices and the like. And there's also some local legend that Rose may have been tapping to alert runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad when it was safe for them to come out of hiding. Rose herself never said anything for or against these rumors. So that part of her life, if it was indeed part of her life, kind of remains a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
We do know that Rose was a single mother through most of her adult life. She had a home near the Union Bank, which is now the Royal Bank in Annapolis Royal, where twice people tried to have her thrown out for keeping an unruly household. Do you know what an unruly household is?
No.
So, according to criminal code at the time in Nova Scotia, an unruly household was something such as a gambling den or a brothel.
You're kidding.
So, there is no evidence that Rose ran anything of the sort out
A
of her
brothel.
house. And in fact, the first court case was actually thrown out completely. There was just no standing in court for this person. And we don't know the results of the second case. But it seems as though someone were trying to basically get her thrown out of her house so that they could buy up the property.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds a little racially motivated or personal.
Yeah.
Because she was not the, what do you want to say, most subtle of human beings.
No, definitely not.
So you can imagine someone having a bone to pick with her and trying to get even in the only ways that, would have legally been available to
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. I completely agree with that. Albert Lewis, Rose's granddaughter's husband, he actually wound up taking over Rose's baggage handling business when she was in her 70s. So she ran it on her own for 20 years. And as
Wow.
far as I know, she was the only employee until Albert Lewis took over. He renamed it Lewis Transfers and built it into an actual business, which was operating up until the 1960s.
Wow.
Yeah, it stayed in business for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
She passed away on February 20th of 1864, making her a sprightly young 90 years old at the time of her death. Which, when you consider everything that she lived through, was positive. I mean, that's old by modern standards.
Yes.
By the standards of the time, that is positively ancient. Especially for somebody who had
Yes.
such a rough upbringing.
When she'd worked into her 70s.
Yeah. And to this day, her family lives on in Nova Scotia. One of them ended up actually becoming the mayor of Annapolis Royal later on. And by later on, I mean like not that long ago.
Do they still carry the name Fortune?
Not that I know of. It seems that mostly it was because she had a daughters. She didn't have any sons, and so Lewis
And the
tends
daughter
to be
would
the
have
name.
married and... Oh,
So
okay.
Albert Lewis was the one who kind of continued on her family legacy,
Yeah.
among others. I think the book I have has a family tree that kind of breaks it down to the modern time, but I don't have that in front of me. So if you want to find out,
Yeah.
go pick up Brenda Thompson's book because it's fantastic. So that's Finding Fortune, documenting and imagining the life of Rose Fortune by Brenda J. Thompson. Check that book out. It is fantastic. It's it gives you a little kind of fictionalized account of Rose's life, followed by all the actual documented evidence that we have of where she was and why, and Thompson's kind of theories on that. It's a fantastic book, and you should definitely check it out.
It's interesting that you did the episode on Rose Fortune this month, because isn't February Black History Month?
Yes, it is. But I've also went through all my previous episodes, and it's a bunch of white dudes and one native guy.
Two. I thought we talked about two.
Maybe two. Maybe two.
When you did the Wendigo episode.
Oh, that's right. There was Swift Runner and
the guy that ate his family.
yeah, Swift Runner and something horse. I have to check.
Yes.
This isn't me forgetting his name because he's native. This is me forgetting his name because I'm terrible at names, and I did that episode so long ago.
I can't remember either. I did a ton of research on that, and I don't have it.
Yeah. So yeah, there is. I just wanted to do someone who kind of fit both the big categories I have not talked about of people that live in Canada, and which are hugely influential categories as well. So
Yes.
yeah, yeah, I just wanted to basically not just do another white guy. So,
Yeah.
and I will probably do a whole month of influential Black Canadians for Black History Month. But I also wanted Rose's story was just really cool, and I just wanted to share it. So
Yeah. What a neat story. Wow.
yeah,
They just made people tougher back then.
they definitely
You
did.
know, I think about, even when you were going to school, uh, there was no, if it's 35 below, there was still school.
Yeah.
Like, I think the cutoff was minus 40. With a wind chill of minus 40, then they wouldn't run buses.
Well,
Today, it is minus, it's an indoor recess if it's minus 23.
yeah.
It's no buses if it's a combined wind chill of minus 30.
I mean, I remember a few days, like not many, but a few days growing up where basically the cutoff for when buses didn't run was when they couldn't get one of the buses to start.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Someone licked their finger and stuck it in the air, and if there was frost when they brought it down, then they'd stop
Well, and even
buses.
now though, like the schools are still open in Canada.
They are.
Like you still have had to go to work, regardless.
Yeah. If Safeway was open, the school was open. That was
The
the
schools are like
that
Waffle
was.
Houses.
They really are. And here's the thing: that's the babysitting function of the modern teacher. Where don't know, you can't provide childcare for your child, send them to school.
Well, it would help if the government actually had other childcare services outside of school, but they don't. So,
Well, I mean, but it used to be like, I mean, I'm talking early 20th century. Uh, if your child, if there were no buses,
no.
for one thing.
Well,
But second, the parents liked having the kids around because they could make them work.
they had something kind of resembling a bus. It was like a specialized carriage. It was like one of the
Oh
local
yeah,
farmers would go around and just haul this, a couple draft horses hauling this big old cart with a bunch of kids on the back.
yeah. Not so much in Western Canada. That's it. Your granddad went to school on horseback.
Yep. Yep.
Most of the time, because they were miles from the schoolhouse, and it would be across the field. If you took the roads, it would be prohibitively long. But if you went as a crow flies across the field. But then think about that in the winter.
Oh, would have been nasty. Like just unpleasant. I I straight up was taking cabs to work because one of my windows on my car was broken when it was like 2 above. It was above freezing
Yeah,
outside. And I'm like, I don't want to
yeah,
drive to work with my window smashed out.
yeah, yeah.
Times
Oh,
have changed.
this nation we live in. So, I'm currently still reading the That Summer in Paris. I haven't finished that one yet.
Okay.
That's Morley Callahan
Yep.
punching
We
Ernest
finally
Hemingway's
both got
Lights
our
Out.
copies of that before Christmas there.
There we go. We'll have to dig into those and do a book talk.
Yeah.
Also, I got the biography of Stompin' Tom Connors.
Oh, good old Stompin' Tom. I don't
Yeah.
know if our
So
American listeners would have any idea who that is or how influential he actually is to Canadian culture.
I think I might take the risk of of when and if we do an episode on Stompin' Tom, just including sort of snippets of some of his songs.
There is a guideline for how much you can include, and this isn't like, okay, my YouTube channel might get copyright claims on those episodes, but like I only have 14 subscribers there compared to like the 60
so as long as they keep their mouths shut.
Regular, yeah. Because I make so much money off of YouTube.
Yeah.
I probably have like 16 mid-roll. I haven't even looked. I probably have like a dozen. I don't even know if I have it. You know, now that I think about it, I don't even know if I have that channel monetized at all.
The YouTube channel?
If I did, I'd probably have like 3 mid-roll ads that run on that thing. Because our episodes are so damn long.
Yeah. No, very good.
Alrighty.
Well, thanks for that episode, Benjamin.
Yeah, I've probably got myself like hashtag canceled. I probably said something I shouldn't have said at some point in this episode, but
No, I don't know. You kept it pretty
I
PC.
tried to. I tried to be respectful of people of all stripes.
As you always do.
Canada is a beautiful mosaic, and I wish to keep it that way.
Yes. We are a cultural mosaic rather than a melting pot.
Well, we try to be a cultural mosaic, but some people are not so happy about that these days. But screw them. So
that's a topic for another episode.
That's a topic with me shouting a lot, so I won't.
In the meantime, folks, you if you're in the prairie provinces, hunker down and stay warm.
Try not to like freeze to death out there.
If you're my buddy Daryl, have your lunch out on your hammock again. He down in Florida. That's what he posted yesterday on his
Does
Facebook.
He listen?
Picture. I don't know if he listens.
Make him listen.
But
tell him to listen to this.
Should make him listen
while he's sipping margaritas
on his hammock.
He's in Florida. Oh, you better watch out for Florida, man. Then.
Yeah, or gator. Is there a gator man?
There is a gator
down
man
there?
in Florida and a skunk ape.
Yeah, I know about the skunk
Florida's
ape.
got some great cryptids, like just straight up.
They do. Well, everything in Florida is trying to kill you.
Oh yeah, even the sun.
Yeah. The sun, the people on the freeways.
Skeeters all full up of that juicy malaria.
And Zika virus.
And now that nobody's vaccinating their kids, smallpox is making a comeback.
The tuberculosis. It's just crazy.
All right.
All right, man.
On that note, keep your eyes open. Stay safe out there.
Take care, everyone.
Canuckonomicon is a production of Crossing Clay Studios. We can be found on Twitter at Canuckonomicon, and you can contact us through email at canuckonomicon@gmail.com. Please be sure to share us with your friends and family, and keep your eyes open.